Well, oh man, that's yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone. While I'm holding my phone, I want to remember to ask you all to please turn off the phones so we do not interrupt the congressman while he's speaking. My name is Nina Rogoff, and I am really, really excited that we have such a good turnout today from across the community, from representing all of the synagogues in Sharon, which is fantastic. So thank you all for coming out on such a cold morning. And I know many of you have submitted questions in advance for the congressman. We have forwarded them to his office, so he has seen them. And after his remarks, we'll ask people who had questions. You can raise your hands. You'll have to come up here to ask your question. And we'll try to do some open mic questions at the end if we can. Okay. I just want to say thank you very much, first of all, to all the people who made this possible, starting in the congressman's office with his aide, Dana Hanson, who is here today. And if you need organization, that's the person to go to. And I also want to thank Jill and Gilbert Ship, because they made this possible today with their having assistance, as well as Charlie Katz, and Stephen Sheffitz, and Bobby Poltman, and Aaron Sachs, who I think after 5 calls he stopped. And of course, not last but not least is Rabbi Justice. I want to thank him. He first spoke about having Congressman Auchinclauss come at the DC rally. And we started working with Congressman's office at that time to make it happen. And we're so appreciative that you made time in your schedule. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Rabbi Justice. Oh, okay. And he's going to lead us in the prayer for the United States and for the state of Israel.
I just first want to thank Nina for being the driver and the engine. It might have been my idea, but you executed it. So we have deep appreciation for you and your competency in getting this done. And I also just want to personally welcome and salute Representative Auchinclauss for being here and just share what I witnessed a few moments ago in the intimacy of my office with Representative Auchinclauss taking a few minutes to sit with Arthur Bloomfield and give him a boost on the road to his recovery, which has been a road that many of us have traveled together with the Bloomfield family. And what I witnessed was a deep and profound humanity. And it was really sweet and really special to see a person who is quite accomplished in the world of politics have such a soulful sweetness and incredible character. And for me, character matters, especially in our world of politics today. That shouldn't have to be the exception, but with Representative Auchinclauss, you are a sterling example of character mattering, and so I personally salute you for that. So thank you. Okay, and now we're going to say a prayer. So you're welcome to rise for our prayer for the welfare of the United States of America, hoping that our Father in heaven gives all of our elected officials the wisdom that's needed in such a complicated time to guide with prudence and to guide with values. Our Father who is in heaven, help and bless this land, the United States of America. Place love and friendship among all its inhabitants. Bless all the leaders of this land and place in their hearts the spirit of wisdom and understanding. To preserve peace and freedom in the land, guard and protect those who guard the United States of America wherever they may be, in the air, at sea, and on the ground. Bless them with victory and return them speedily to their homes in peace and in good health. Now let us respond. Amen. And now we turn from the American flag to the Israeli flag as we say the tefillah for Medinat Israel in Hebrew. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo. Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha be'avrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shalomecha. Ushlach orcha v'yamitcha l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzeha. V'taknein be'etza tova milfanecha. V'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam leyoshveha. Ufakdenu na b'chol artzot pizurenu. V'tolichenu meheira kumiyut l'tzion yirecha v'l'Yerushalayim mishkan shemecha. V'yomar kol asher neshama v'yapo Adonai Elohei Yisrael melech u'malchuto b'kol mashala. And now we add a second part for our chayalim, for our soldiers, including my brother and many of your children who are fighting in Israel right now. Barech et chayalei tzva hagana liYisrael. Ha'omdim al mishmar artzeinu v'yarei Eloheinu ba'avir b'yam u'b'yabasha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmor v'yatzil et chayaleinu. Mikol tzara v'tzukah mikol nega u'machala. Yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol maseh yedehem v'nomar amen. May be seated. And now I'd like to invite our very own Dr. David Briscoe, member both of Young Israel of Sharon and Temple Israel, and it's especially special to be able to have all the shuls in Sharon come together to stand tall with Israel, and to have a bridge builder among us, Dr. Briscoe, who is a professor at the Harvard School of Medicine, to give the introduction for Representative Auchinclauss. Bevakasha.
Good morning, Boker Tov. I work in the field of immunology and organ transplantation, and it was through that work that I first met and got to know today's guest, Jake Auchinclauss' father. And Congressman Auchinclauss is currently serving a second term representing the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts. In addition to his work on the committees for transportation and infrastructure and the Select Committee for Strategic Competition between the United States and China, his areas of focus include healthcare, clean energy, gun violence, and building a strong middle class. He has served on the Committee for Financial Services, the Subcommittee on National Security, International Development and Monetary Policy, and the Committee for Transportation and Infrastructure, among others. So you can imagine he's quite busy and very involved congressman. And he voted recently to provide Israel with support following the mass attack in October 7th. Jake was born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts, the son of Hugh and Laurie, and the grandson of the late Melvin Glimcher. After graduating from Harvard, Jake joined the Marines, where he commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. On returning home, he continued his service as a 3-term counselor in Newton. And while serving in City Hall, on nights and weekends, he built a career in business. He worked in product development for a leading insurance company and also for a cybersecurity startup. He has degrees in economics and finance from Harvard and MIT. Today, Jake lives in Newton with his wife, Michelle, and their children, Teddy, Grace, and Audrey, and I believe a Labrador called Donut. Congressman, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here. I'm going to hand this over to Nina, I believe. Thank you.
Good morning. Morning. Before I start, would you mind, just by a show of hands, if you have a family member in Israel right now? And if you could keep your hand up if you have a family member serving in the IDF. May God bless them. This is personal for this shul. This is personal. Last week, I was one of only 2 Democrats to vote against a continuing resolution to fund the government in protest at the continued exclusion of funds for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel from our spending plans. The president is asking for more than $100 billion for initiatives overseas and at home. And I strongly support his objectives: to arm Ukraine against Russia, to strengthen our Indo-Pacific allies against China, to defend Israel against terrorists, and to secure our own border. Events around the world are a test for the United States. It feels like the world is becoming more dangerous for democracy. It feels like events are spinning ever faster. And the coming month is a rapidly closing window of opportunity, a moment to demonstrate leadership and to act with resolve to defend democracy. In Europe, Ukrainians are fighting for their survival as a democracy against a brutal and unprovoked invasion by a war criminal. The United States has responded as the leader of the free world, sending materiel, rallying allies, and demonstrating resolve. The return on investment has been impressive. Europe is stronger, Russia is weaker, and the rules-based international order that underpins peace and prosperity has been reinvigorated. But the fight is far from over, and Ukraine is worn out and worried. To cut and run from Ukraine now would be a betrayal of our allies and a victory for Vladimir Putin. Appeasement will not end war. We know that. It will embolden the war maker on NATO's border. In the Pacific, the Chinese Communist Party threatens Taiwan, which recently elected a new president who favors closer ties with the United States and rejects unification with China. China also militarizes the South China Sea. Its aim is to upend the post-war stability of the Pacific, with explicit attacks on individual rights, free enterprise, rule of law, and democracy itself. Under pressure, longtime partners like Japan and South Korea, India and Australia, Singapore and the Philippines are wondering whether the United States has staying power. Through diplomatic and security pacts, the president has answered in the affirmative. Now Congress must back him up in demonstrating that the United States is no fair weather friend. Just two days ago, I met with the new Taiwanese ambassador to the United States, who indicated that the Chinese Communist Party was intimately involved in the recent elections in Taiwan, and their main source of propaganda on the island was to try to convince young Taiwanese in particular that the United States would not be there for them if they needed our assistance, that we were a declining power, no longer able to stand by our commitments. Those are words. The Taiwanese rejected them, but they are going to be looking for our actions to demonstrate their falsity. And then finally, in the Middle East, of course, Israel is at war against terrorists whose aim is the annihilation of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. The accounts and the videos of the October 7th attacks, which I have seen, and I know many in here have seen, sicken the soul. It was a day deadlier than crystal meth. Many in the West have tried to look away, to equivocate, to deny, or even to celebrate the barbarity of Hamas, and we cannot let them. Hamas has repeatedly assured the world that it seeks to repeat those atrocities, which include murder, torture, rape, infanticide, and the taking of hostages. This has been a hard war, as we knew it would. Hamas is hunkered underground, using hostages as young as 1 year old as human shields. They have been preparing for more than a decade for this eventuality. Instead of building infrastructure to help Palestinians, Hamas built terror tunnels to kill Israelis. Despite the opprobrium directed at Israel from college campuses all the way up to the International Criminal Court, it is Hamas and Hamas alone that could end this terrible war right now. Israel must have the continued support of its most important ally, the United States, including congressionally sanctioned military aid. Our fellow democracy is fighting for freedom. The Jewish people are defending their right to a secure homeland in a region of spiraling violence, from Gaza to Lebanon to Yemen to Syria, orchestrated by the evil regime of the Ayatollah. Weakness is not an option. In recent weeks, there has been increasing tension between the United States and Israel. Politics and personalities aside, I believe this tension does not originate from strategic divergence, nor from any weakening of U.S. resolve in Congress or in the White House. but rather from insufficient precision and alignment on the objectives of this war. And for this, Prime Minister Netanyahu does deserve criticism. But Congress, and I expect the President, would respond well to a statement from the War Cabinet that crystallized the war aims as follows. Number one, the return of all hostages as the first and governing priority, whether by force or by diplomacy. Number two, the degradation of Hamas such that it cannot regain a monopoly on the use of organized violence in post-war Gaza. And number three, establishment of transitional governance for Gaza that is consistent with both Israel's immediate security and the aspiration of the Palestinian people for a state. To establish such governance, Israel will need to work not just with the United States, but with the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The potential for such governance lies not just in Israel's war and diplomacy in Gaza and with the Arab states, but also in a course correction in the West Bank, away from aggressive settlement policies and actions. I understand the limitations of the current political situation in Israel, but now is the time for statesmanship. President Biden has met the moment in these last 4 months. We need Prime Minister Netanyahu or another leader to meet the moment too. The Israeli people certainly have, and I will stand with them enduringly. From Europe to Asia to the Middle East, democracy is fighting back, paralyzed by the extremism and dysfunction of the House under 2 speakers now. Congress has not in 2023 been a bulwark in defense of democracy, but in 2024 we can be if we approve the president's request and give strength to democracy abroad. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your question.
Thank you very much. Okay, if you have a question that you would like to ask Congressman Auchinclauss, please raise your hand and you can come up here and stand at the microphone. All right, Renee.
You said that now is the time for statesmanship from Israel, but Israel has shown statesmanship many times. It never seems to apply to the Palestinian side. Why are we the only ones that have to show statesmanship? And how would it ever end well?
You're absolutely right that these negotiations are going to require statesmanship from all parties. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is right when he says that much of what drives the terrorism of Hamas is not the lack of a Palestinian state, but the existence of a Jewish state. That is true as well. And I don't think anybody assumes right now that a 2-state solution is an immediate possibility. But I struggle to see how Israel can be a Jewish democratic state without a state for the Palestinian people that encompasses the West Bank and Gaza. The demography and the math simply don't add up. And we are going to need the Saudis, the Egyptians, ideally the Qataris and the United Arab Emirates to, through and with the Abraham Accords diplomatic momentum, create transitional governance in Gaza that marginalizes Hamas. The entirety of Hamas cannot be extinguished. I mean, no more than Egypt could extinguish the Muslim Brotherhood from within it, but it can be denied a monopoly on the use of force, and it can be denied political oxygen. We're going to require Arab states to help with that. I don't think the Palestinian Authority is up for it, but they may have to be part of that transitional governance plan. But Israel trying to do the security itself perpetually, we tried that and it didn't work either. And so it's not just Israel that needs to demonstrate statesmanship. It's not just Netanyahu. It is also the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Palestinian Authority, and of course, the United States as a broker.
Do you believe that Israel has the sovereign right to govern its country and provide security for its people, just as we do in the U.S.? And if so, why do you feel it was appropriate to join with other members of Congress in criticizing Netanyahu's statement that Israel needs security over all the lone West Bank people?
I do. I criticize the prime minister's statement is because his statement is a direct contradiction of the eventuality of the Palestinian state in Gaza. And right now, that is a deeply unhelpful statement to make. We got to keep Congress together in support of this aid. And it's been politicized enough in the House by being attached to Ukraine, by being attached to border security, by being attached to IRS tax cuts. I mean, we got to get these $14 billion out the door. We don't need Prime Minister Netanyahu undercutting not just the Democratic Party's position, but frankly, Congress's position on the eventual outcome, and of course, President Biden himself. And then number two is, how are we supposed to get Arab states on board with transitional governance for Gaza if they cannot say to their own populations that we have a path here for the legitimate Palestinian aspiration for statehood and dignity? He's isolating himself now, where he is basically promising that Israel in perpetuity is going to be in charge of security for Gaza for 2.2 million people. The surface area for terrorism and conflict is going to be unending. And so these statements are unhelpful, and to me, they reflect more his domestic political concerns than they do a foreign policy imperative to actually articulate war aims that can be achieved.
Andy?
Senator, I wanted to thank you for signing that letter, the two-state letter for the day. And was wondering, clearly the
I can repeat it as well.
okay, is this on? Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, just thanking the representative for signing the two-state letter the other day. And clearly the disaster in Gaza lays at Hamas's feet. I mean, that's the first cause. I am wondering what your sense is, what the U.S. can do at this point to address the humanitarian disaster happening for Palestinians in Gaza right now.
The U.S. has done more than any other nation already. The shipments through Rafah crossing, the negotiations between Egypt and Israel on how inspections are going to work, the humanitarian corridor between North and South Gaza, of course, the hostage deal. These are all the direct result, not even the indirect result. I mean, these are the direct result of President Biden himself being involved in the negotiations. And Anthony Blinken has been in the Middle East, I believe, 7 or 8 times since October 7th, trying to keep things contained. So I think there's a few things going forward. One is the United States needs to continue to work to prevent this turning into a regional conflagration. I understand the thinking within the war cabinet that perhaps this is a time to attack Hezbollah in particular at the same time as they're battling Hamas. I think that would be unwise. One war at a time. Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and of course Iran itself. Israel needs to maintain a one-front posture here. And to the extent that Houthi attacks in the Red Sea upend global shipping and raise oil prices or raise consumer prices, it puts further unnecessary pressure on Israel. And so I'd like to see, and I think Secretary Blinken has done a good job of this, and the president himself, of doing the utmost possible to contain this conflict and to support very precise, crystallized war aims in Gaza. Number two, continue to put pressure on the war cabinet for humanitarian supplies, food, medicine, and the basics. But then number three is, and the most important, is brokering a hostage deal. This does not end until the hostages are back. It cannot. They all have to come home. And it's increasingly clear that that's going to happen through another diplomatic cord. I mean, Israel's top generals themselves are saying that it's unlikely that you can, through special operations within these tunnels, rescue the 100+ hostages still remaining, some of them are children. And the United States is the only country that can broker that deal, probably directly with Qatar.
And then Tanya, which is her.
warrant thank you comments for being here and for service the country, and continued service. So I've seen countless reports on this aid that the U.S. generously given to the Palestinians, being stolen by Hamas, and potentially even fueling the conflict further, extending it if they're well supplied in food and material and fuel. President Biden said months ago if the aid was stolen, it would end. How can they continue? And this is not just a continuation of sort of failed policies that have led to UNRWA and all the other NGOs taking responsibility for the Gazans and thereby excusing responsibility for the elected government, the elected Hamas to take charge. That's the question. I think there's two separate threads of inquiry there. One is about pre-war UNRWA and the use of aid and how Hamas was misappropriating that aid, and the other is during the conflict itself about the humanitarian aid going in there. There's no good options in the Middle East, particularly in this conflict. Am I going to stand here and say that every single dollar of aid that we have sent, not a single one has gone to Hamas? No, I'm not going to stand here and say that. I don't know that, and I'm sure some of it has. But present me with the counterfactual. So we don't put humanitarian aid in there, and the 2.2 million Palestinian people, almost 1 million of whom are children, are left without clean water or medicine or food. It's not an acceptable outcome, and it's not one that's actually in Israel's security interest as well, because it breeds civil unrest, rioting, and the soil bed for further terrorism. Pressure on you to open up a riot. Pressure on you to open Rafah temporarily. Let the job be finished. Let offer refuge to those that are innocent out of Rafah. Let the IDF get the job done. What you're referring to is the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people into Egypt. Now, number one, the Egyptians are not going to do that. The Egyptians did that. The Muslim Brotherhood will be back real fast in Egypt. I can assure you Al-Sisi will never, ever assent to that. Number two is we're not going to expel millions of people into a foreign land. It's not going to, if you want to see the death of the Abraham Accords, it's going to happen right there. As they expel, plenty will leave, but they can't. The Egyptians will not accept it, and it doesn't actually solve the core problem, which is that the tunnel network in southern Gaza is 3 or 4 times bigger than the Israelis had conceived of. I mean, Hamas has built an entire terrorist beneath ground, and their senior leadership is hiding next to the hostages.
And I'm sorry, I don't know their name.
Hi, Congressman. Good morning. I'm Talia. I grew up in Sharon. I serve in the IDF. My husband is currently fighting in Israel. My brother came home this week from Gaza. And I'm a student at the Columbia School of Social Work. So it's a ride. Yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on the current anti-Israel wing of the Democratic Party and about the future of the Democratic Party as it stands to Israel, given the current anti-Israel trends. And I would like to hear what actions you are personally taking to combat the severe rise in anti-Israel sentiment / anti-Semitic sentiment from those in the Democratic Party, including some representatives from Massachusetts. Yeah.
So I think two things can be true at the same time, and they can be in tension with one another. The first is that there has been a rise in anti-Israel rhetoric on the left and anti-Semitic rhetoric at times from the left. And also that the Democratic Party remains forcefully pro-Israel. Joe Biden is the leader of the Democratic Party and has been the most pro-Israel president in American history, full stop. He has now, I think, edged out Harry Truman for meeting Israel's needs when it most counted. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House of Representatives, strongly pro-Israel. Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, strongly pro-Israel. And when you look at the vote tallies, as I do very carefully on the board in the House, for amendment votes, for Iron Dome votes, for resolutions in support of Israel, it's above 400. out of 435. I mean, we don't name post offices with the kind of vote tallies that we see in support of Israel. So I don't want people to get the perception, as one can get from Twitter or from MSNBC or from the Columbia School of Social Work, that there is this anti-Israel rage sweeping the country. And let me just put one further tie on that. As someone who's engaged in political communications frequently, be very careful of these polls that you see getting circulated. Oh, 50% of Gen Z supports Hamas over Israel. 70% of the Democratic Party wants an immediate ceasefire. Time out. I spend a lot of time worrying about how to ask questions and think about the responses from constituents. And some more careful polling has been done that reveals that, in fact, there is a deep reservoir of support for Israel, yes, within the Democratic Party. If you ask the average American, do you want a ceasefire in the Middle East? People are going to say yes, right? If you ask them with the context that is required for them to understand the situation, you get a different answer. So a lot of times polls start with an agenda and then fill in the data. We have to listen to people who are going out there to actually understand what the real constituent pulse is on this. So it's not nearly as bad as you might expect. However, I do not also want to claim that we don't have a problem, because we do have a problem. But the problem is not in Congress right now. We'll pass the things that we have, and it won't even be close. The problem is on college campuses right now. The problem is in K-12 right now, where unfortunately, my friend Richie Torres, a school in his district recently showed a map, a public school, recently showed a map that Israel just wasn't even on. And actually, what was worse than that was the response, the apology from the principal afterwards, which wasn't an apology. They basically said, well, we were just trying to show the students an image of the Arab world. And we stand against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Like, just, what? We have a real issue here with
Was he fired?
I don't know. I don't think he was fired.
Question.
It is one of the questions, and we're going to need to do a better job with faculty and administration across K-12 and higher education of ensuring that our education system represents first of all the truth and the facts of the Middle East, the context and the history. There's so much focus these days on inculcating different perspectives. And to me, it starts with having a shared truth. We have to just understand the history of that region. That should be the focus of K-12. And from there, at the higher levels of the academy, students can engage in more sort of opinion first studies. But at K-12, it's got to be just about the facts. And we're doing a bad job of educating people. And as the Jewish people understand, in an ignorant environment, anti-Semitism will flourish.
That one principle did not make that matter.
All right, thank you. Let me just get a few people up here for questions. So, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. And this woman back there. And I'll try to get. We'll all try to get to as many questions as possible. Thank you, Congressman.
Hi, I'm Johanna, and the first thing I wanted to say is that of all our representatives, you have been the only one to answer specifically anything that I've written as a petition or as a comment, and I really appreciate it. The others don't answer me at all, and one answers, but it's always the form letter that says I can call his office. Anyway, I recently read that Saudi Arabia and China have put forth a proposal for a resolution for the issue in the Middle East in terms of governance and two-state solution and so forth. And I haven't heard a lot about it in the public, and I was wondering what your opinion and what you're seeing about this proposal? Because it looks very promising.
I have to admit that I'm not familiar with the details of the proposal. I don't judge a message entirely by the messenger, but a peace proposal crafted by China and Saudi Arabia is going to have a pretty high bar to clear for me in terms of credibility. My hunch is that it was dead on arrival with Israel. Um, in my opinion, and it may be an unpopular viewpoint, the actual linchpin of much of this, even more so than Saudi Arabia and certainly more than China, which tries to advertise itself as a player in the Middle East and really actually is not so much other than its oil imports. The real linchpin player here is Qatar. Qatar is a terrible actor in all of this. I mean, they have been Hamas's front door to the world for its financial plumbing and its diplomatic outposts. Because of that role, however, they're also the best interlocutor we have because the Qatari prince or sheikh is actually fairly pro-US and wants good relations with America. The deal that got the first round of hostages home was done through the Qataris, and my hunch is the final deal to get the rest of the hostages home will be done through the Qataris. And if we're able to get the Qataris along with the Saudis to buy into post-war governance plans for Gaza, that could be the real unlock of regional support for that deal. And the reason to me that's important is that there is regional Arab support for post-war transitional governance deal in Gaza. You will not see, I don't believe, the resurgence of Hamas there. That is what can do it, particularly the Qataris, can prevent the resurgence of Hamas. The Muslim Brotherhood has been unsuccessful in countries where there has been a more moderate, not necessarily pro-Israel, but a more moderate political wing that has emerged and that has had more pan-Arab legitimacy.
Congressman, and big thank you. I'm Rabbi Joseph Mesler from Temple Sinai. First, I just want to say thank you for immediately after October 7th, when Representative Presley and others were calling for an immediate ceasefire. You were somebody to stand up against your fellow Democrat and say that that was an awful and terrible and immoral thing to call for. And so I really want to thank you for your leadership. My question has to do not about the war, but how we talk about the war. I know I've got 2 kids in college, and some of them are going to be voting for the first time for president. And I have students in my congregation who are going to college. One of them to Columbia. She came down out of her dorm and found a sit-in of masked people chanting Intifada in the lounge, trying to get from her elevator to the front door. Then they see advertisements of white Christian nationalism, and they don't see their place in the world right now. So I would like to imagine that this is a room full of Jewish college students. And what would you say to them in this moment? Really, where do they belong? Where do they fit in this time and place?
Well, I mean, they belong anywhere that they want to be. That is the promise of the United States. There should not have to be self-segregation for sense of safety or community. We're a country that believes, divorced from blood or soil, that anybody who comes here, who wants to build a life here, who wants to follow the Constitution and realize a better future for their children belongs here. And in that mindset, the Jewish people have flourished in the United States. And unfortunately, in the last 5 years, we have seen, before October 7th, only amplified by October 7th, we have seen this growing hostility to the Jewish people and to Israel and these elite institutions. The first thing I would say to them, though, beyond that, is they don't have to accept that. That is a learning environment that's illegal. And the faculty and the administration need to be subject to the Department of Education Civil Rights Division for creating an environment in which students can freely learn. Because that's the route. That applies to Harvard as well. And I have said that publicly and privately to Harvard, that it is unacceptable for them to have protesters that are persistent and directed at Jewish students and Israeli students that create an environment where they don't feel like they belong. They certainly cannot learn and cannot self-actualize, as is the purpose of a higher education. And the Department, Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education is pursuing these universities, Harvard included, for failure to act. The second thing I would say, though, is to be cautious of the current architecture that exists in these institutions, not just of higher education, but media and entertainment as well, for Jews to belong. And that is this architecture that is really premised on a grievance narrative about who can articulate why their given people have been most persecuted, and why, because of that history, they have now today special rights or privileges. That, to me, is a counterproductive way to engage through this kind of ever-widening DEI complex on in these institutes. We celebrate diversity and inclusion, and indeed Harvard's own statement on this in 2018 was excellent. It tapped into the deep American imperative for pluralism, for viewpoint diversity, political diversity, racial, ethnic diversity. We celebrate that. It makes us a richer community. It drives people to be more thoughtful, turns mirrors into windows. But it cannot become a self-actuating bureaucracy that is hostile to certain groups. And I think that the Jewish people are not going to be well served by that. And they need instead to force these institutions to go back to a small L liberal worldview, which treats every individual as inherently worthy, as inherently dignified, simply by being a human being.
So, hi, so nice to meet you, and I also want to thank you for your early and critical sort of Israel and the statement against Hamas that came out. Can't remember if it was October 7th or 8th, but very quickly. Okay, and I work for your mom, and I'm also quite proud of the statement she put out. I'm wondering if you helped her. Yes, I've heard a lot about your international policy, and I'm also part of the academic community and really concerned about what I'm seeing there. There's a little bit of a crystal meth. So your connection to MIT, your mother's to the Harvard Medical School. And I just am wondering if there is anything that can be done to put the pressure first on the Arab communities, the Muslim community. I don't think they're doing their part in this discussion, what you can do to engage them. And then also, there is concern about healthcare policy. So you're involved in healthcare policy. How can you bring that, maybe use your vision for international policy and bring that together? There's a big problem with the impact on healthcare and on Palestinians, some Israelis, as they're going through this battle, on the other people that you've talked about. So what can you do to sort of, with your vision, bring all these pieces together?
Well, I appreciate it. I have reached out and met with Muslim and Arab communities in the Massachusetts Fourth and elsewhere, and have had hard and deep conversations with them. And here in Massachusetts, what I have heard in those conversations is much of the same actual anxiety as I hear when I speak to the Jewish community, which is to say, our kids are getting bullied in school. We feel like people are making assumptions about what we believe based on who we are. We wonder whether we really belong here. These are deep human impulses in response to the tragedy half a world away. And it has left me more confident that there are bridges to be built between people, even across the gulfs that exist right now. And it's incumbent upon me, as a representative of 800,000 people, a diverse district, to be one of those bridges, and I'll certainly continue to try to be so.
And good seeing, Matthew, I'll keep getting to as many as I can.
Thank you, Jake, for everything that you have done and continue to do. And thank you for kind of bringing this description of kind of the current state of affairs of the current state of Washington. My question is, we have a large group of people here, and we want to continue to be as effective as possible, both on the national level, and we know that the Massachusetts senatorial delegation recently supported Bernie Sanders' resolution. What is the most effective thing that we can do? Is it phone calls? Is it letters? How can we provide that influence to help support kind of your initiatives and vision?
I appreciate the question. There's no one right way. Let me offer a couple of thoughts. The first is that organization really matters. And I mean, the Jewish community has, especially in Greater Boston, has such a thriving ecosystem of both civil society and political organizations, and continue to invest in those. I read a report recently, I think it was commissioned by the JFNA, about civic giving and civic involvement in the various Jewish federations across the country. And there was good news and bad news. The bad news was that in some major metropolises it had been declining, going from baby boomers to Gen X to millennials. It was dipping a little bit. The good news was that in Greater Boston it wasn't actually, remained pretty engaged. That stuff really, really matters, and continue to be involved with those organizations, because their ability to aggregate, inform, and then articulate the Jewish community's viewpoint gives it a lot of leverage and weight. Because by sheer numbers, even in places like Greater Boston, the Jewish community is not very big. And so it requires this kind of organization to have leverage. Number two is, don't assume that national politics is all there is. By the time you've got people at the level of national politics, their ideology is oftentimes coherent, and they've got a huge set of constituencies that they're navigating. It's very effective to engage state and local, and particularly in in educating young, promising politicians about Israel, and if possible, sending them to Israel, which is I know it's expensive, but it's a really good return on investment. People come back from Israel and their viewpoint has changed. And I see that over and over and over again. And then finally, school committee seats are the most important political office in America. I really believe that. And in most towns, most of them, this is not true for Sharon, I know, but in most towns, most of them are not contested. These school committees are the board of directors for an entity that is, one, spending broadly half of your tax dollars at all levels of government combined, and two, that is inculcating the next generation's moral and academic viewpoint. When people say, oh, you shouldn't politicize school, absolutely we should politicize this. I mean, we want to let the professionals run the schools, but this is a deeply inherently political issue. What we are teaching our kids, of course that's political, and it does matter who's school committee members. And I always encourage people to get involved in those races, because it has the highest leverage to me of almost any political seat.
Matthew, do you want to come up? You had C2 and where are you pointing to? I can't tell.
That guy over there has hand up, right?
Yeah, okay. So and that's after Howard and me.
My name is Matthew Zismore. I'm a member of the synagogue. Thank you very much for coming. A few observations. The PLO has never amended its charter for the destruction of Israel. And they have a policy of pay for slaying. After World War II, millions and millions of Germans were repatriated from Czechoslovakia to Germany. In the creation of India and Pakistan, millions and millions went from one country to the other. And then you just said, well, Egypt can't have the Gazites because that'll strengthen the Muslim Brotherhood. So we should keep them in Gaza, and they'll be second generation Hamas The tragedy in the Middle East is that you have all these Arab countries and Gaza, they speak the same language, they worship the same religion, and they've never allowed them to go from one country to another to take them in as citizens. If that would have been the case, there never would have been a problem.
So you're not gonna find a robust defense for me of the PLO. I mean, the PLO is a corrupt and incompetent organization served by an individual who I think is on his like 18th year of his 4-year term, and has really done nothing for the betterment of the West Bank. And yet I would push back on, I think, the sweeping equation that you're making between the PLO and all forms of Palestinian governance, because as I said, in the Middle East, you rarely find good options, but there are bad and worse options. And the PLO is better than Hamas. And the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has been significantly better than Hamas. Have they been corrupt? Have they been incompetent? Yes, but they've also been in cooperation with the Israeli security forces to prevent the West Bank turning into a launching pad for terrorist attacks. And so in this situation, we need to be looking for modest and incremental gains. And the most important first step is to prevent Hamas, as currently constituted, from being able to exercise suzerainty within Gaza, and from being able to launch attacks against Israel. That does not mean that the iterations that follow on this, on Hamas, are going to be beneficent or an organization that even recognizes, frankly, Israel's right to exist. But we have to start that civil evolution now. And paper slay, I agree with you. It's unconscionable, and I've joined my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in repeatedly denouncing it, both to our State Department and to actors in the Middle East as well.
My name is Yinzi. This what? So you said history matters. So Palestinian people are people who were kicked out of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. How come we're not asking them to provide a state for Palestinians and assist in that matter? Furthermore, during the ceasefire, Palestinians in the West Bank murdered 2 of their own, claiming that they were collaborators with Israel, and then they further on celebrated it like a concert through their own streets. Many Palestinians, furthermore, would not only support Hamas, but were complicit in the attacks and holding of hostages, as several of the hostages have come out and recently said that they were held by Palestinian civilians. How can we possibly say that they deserve their own state if this is the people that we're giving a state to?
Some of this I think I've addressed already here, so I won't delve too deep in here. Have there been atrocities committed by Hamas? Of course, we all are intimately familiar with them. And have those atrocities been at times aided and abetted by Palestinian civilians? Of course, we know that as well. It's well documented. And the line between Hamas membership, Hamas leadership, the Gaza official governance, and the Palestinian people, of course, has gray areas and back and forth. But that does not then follow that the displacement of 2.2 million people is what is going to secure Israel's future, or is what's going to secure their future. That is a leap that is jumping over many more modest improvements to the welfare of the Palestinian people. Again, half of whom are children. Israel is a nation of millions of people surrounded by 500 million Arab people. So that core reality exists, and it needs to be mediated through ultimate statehood for the Palestinian people. I don't think people are expecting that there is going to be a state the day after kinetic operations in Gaza stop. But there cannot be a situation where Israel is directly saying what we are doing forever precludes that possibility. That will prevent, and that those 500 million Arabs will forever be then threatening Israel's existence, and the achievements of the Abraham Accords will be unwound.
Wouldn't that then be rewarding Hamas and terrorists for their actions, like giving them the path to statehood through this?
The Hamas leadership, I understand the point that you don't want to create a situation where Hamas can go ahead and say, we were the ones who stopped this momentum behind the Abraham Accords and made sure that there was a place for the Palestinian state. And my only response to that can be that those people in Hamas who would say that need to be killed. So that whatever celebration they might want to be partaking in will be of limited conviviality, because they're all dead man walking.
The supporters
And again, you're talking about a political situation here where we are not going to be able to extinguish popular support for Hamas within Gaza. There's 2.2 million people there. Hamas won elections, and frankly would win elections now probably. That is the situation. That is what the reality on the ground that exists. And what can be done is to prevent an entity that has the means and the will for directly attacking Israel from gaining the capabilities to do so. That does not mean that you're going to build Switzerland next door immediately.
Thank you for being here, everything you do. My questions sort of speak to a little bit of what you're hearing, which is that when thinking about how we go forward, what is a thoughtful, nuanced way that ultimately serves our interests? There's so much trauma came was sort of invoked through this sort of series of events impacting this community, impacting the community in Israel. How do you get people to move beyond sort of that existential kind of worry that almost clouds thinking, which probably was part of the goals of this whole operation to begin with? How do you move people from extremes back into an arena where they can have conversations?
Well, I mean, that might be a bigger question than I can answer here. One, the hostages have to come home. I think the people in this congregation will know better and more intimately than me, but my sense from speaking to many, many Israelis is that the Israeli psyche cannot be healed until that situation is resolved. And so the hostages need to come home by force or by diplomacy. And I think also Israel needs to be able to safely repopulate both its north and its south. If Israelis feel like they have ceded territory because of the attacks, I think also that would be deeply damaging the national psyche and prevent more moderation. And that requires both diplomacy and force with Gaza and Hezbollah, and potentially directly with Iran as well. And the final thing I'll say, and may not be popular here, but I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu is the man to do that. I'm not an Israeli politician. I'm not a member of Likud. I'm not in the Knesset. But I worry about what his incentives are.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of questions still. We just have time for one more. I just looked at the clock. So I'm going to ask Howard Stone to finish. And I also just want to make note if any of you brought in cups or anything like that. I have two other people to thank, Leroy and Lisa Schreiber, who are going to help with the cleanup after this event. And you can help them by making sure you take whatever you brought in with you, okay? So Howard.
Thank you very much. Some of the key words I've heard of the time of statesmanship. And sometimes people say things that are perceived to be unhelpful. And in that context, going forward, we like to eliminate unhelpful statements. When the Hamas mission statement is the creation of an Islamic Palestinian state in Israel's place, that's not helpful, really. What can we do to put the kind of pressure that we're putting on other people about not making unhelpful statements to get this changed? If that was changed, a lot of progress could be made in statesmanship.
I mean, I think what you're driving towards more specifically what I have been alluding to, which is, I mean, first of all, Hamas and Hamas alone is responsible for what has happened here. And second of all, well, to say that we are going to deracinate and uproot the entirety of Hamas through this war, I think is an unreasonable warning. I think the United States itself has understood that through its wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and its own attacks against proxy terror groups in the Middle East. What is, I think, a good war aim is to say this current iteration of Hamas, of the Muslim Brotherhood, that has explicitly in its charter not just the destruction of the Jewish state, but actually the extermination of the Jewish people globally. That's really what they're aiming for. They're quite clear about that. And that has consistently broken ceasefires and has consistently said that its path to popular support is through terrorism. That version of Hamas has no place in post-war Gaza. And that through violence and through the engagement of Arab states, we can moderate that version towards something that can govern in conjunction with others. This is not a vision for warm relations between Israel and Gaza in the near term. It is not that. It is a vision for the security at the very basic terms, the security of the Israeli people, staring across at another governance structure that at the very least does not have as part of its mandate the murder of Jews, and something that can over time evolve towards governance and statehood for the Palestinian people through economic development and the competent provision of civil services, which they've been deprived of for 2 decades now.
Thank you very much. I don't even know if we have a chance to finish.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the very thoughtful questions and the back and forth here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend.
We appreciate it. If anyone would like to stop in a social hall for case, please be in coffee, please look yourself.